The day I signed the deed to the oceanfront villa, I thought I'd finally made it. Not in the flashy, millionaire playboy kind of way, those days were never mine, but in the quiet, earned it over decades kind of way. The kind of made it that smells like lemon oil on hardwood floors and sounds like silence at sunset. Peace after a lifetime of responsibility. It was a modern Spanish-style villa off Horizon Crest in Carmel. Ocean to the west, ridgeline behind. Gated, secluded. 3 bedrooms, private beach access, wine cellar, high archways, and hand-painted tile. I'd closed escrow on a Thursday, just shy of my 67th birthday. The movers had finished unpacking the last of the furniture that morning. My books were still boxed, but I'd placed my leather reading chair in front of the panoramic window in the study, overlooking the surf. I'd been halfway through unwrapping a set of Riedel crystal glasses, my housewarming gift to myself, when the phone rang. That's when it all started. It was the tone that got me. No greeting. No, "Hi, Richard. How's the new place?" Just a command. "We're on our way to you. 15 of us. 3 weeks. Prepare beds, towels, slippers, food. We'll be there in 40 minutes. No, please. No question. Just arrogance. Brian. Brian Miller. My son-in-law, if that title still meant anything. He'd married my daughter, Camille, 12 years ago, and I never quite figured out where I stood with him. Not disliked, not respected either. A neutral presence with a bank account. "Brian," I said carefully, placing the glass down on the counter. "I just moved in 2 days ago. Nothing's settled. This isn't, you've got the space, and we need the break." "It's been a stressful quarter," he interrupted. "Jessica's bringing the kids. My brother and his wife are tagging along, plus a couple close friends. It's basically a family retreat. Everyone's excited." "A family retreat?" I repeated. "Yeah," he said, like I was slow to catch on. "You can relax, too. There's plenty of room. And Jessica wants the master bedroom for her morning yoga content. Killer light in there, I'm told. We'll let you know what we want for dinner when we get close." Then the line went dead. 40 minutes. I stared at the phone like it might offer an apology, or an explanation. But all it did was reflect the overhead light back at me, blank and silent. I'd spent my whole life being reasonable, reliable. I'd raised Camille alone after her mother left us, paid my mortgage on time, showed up to every science fair and cello recital, even after 16-hour days as a civil engineer. I'd planned for my retirement like I'd planned for everything else, meticulously, modestly, and with everyone else in mind. Camille had always been grateful. But then came Brian, a smooth talker with a salesman's grin, an MBA he never really used, and a habit of calling favors collaborations. They'd lived in my old Craftsman for 3 years rent-free after their first child. I'd funded a bridge loan for their new place in Santa Clara when their lender fell through. I paid for private school tuition when the startup bubble burst. Never once did Brian offer a repayment schedule. Never once did he ask if it was too much. He just assumed. And I let him. I moved through the new house in slow, deliberate steps, past the bare walls and fresh paint, past the empty shelves and unused guest rooms. Every step echoed. This house was mine. I'd worked 42 years for it. I stepped out onto the deck. The surf was coming in heavy, that late autumn rhythm that starts in October. Long swells and crisp edges to the breeze. The water below shimmered steel blue under a cloud-streaked sky. I let the wind hit me full in the face and tried to remember what it had felt like, 3 days ago, to turn the key in the front door for the first time. I'd imagined peace. I hadn't imagined Brian. 15 people. 3 weeks. They were treating my retirement villa like a damn Airbnb. And the part that lodged deep, like a burr behind my ribs, was that they hadn't even asked. I went back inside and opened the linen closet. 5 towels, 2 sets of guest sheets still in their packaging. No slippers, no food, no plan. Brian had said something about the kids. Jessica's youngest had dietary restrictions, if I remembered correctly. Brian's brother was a vegan. His wife drank oat milk and only oat milk. And that was the thing. I did remember, because I always kept track, always adjusted, always made it work. But as I stood in the kitchen, my hands on the cool granite counter, a thought came to me, as clear and sharp as the sound of seagulls diving past the bluff. Not this time. I wasn't going to scramble to accommodate people who treated my life like a timeshare. I wasn't going to be the retiree on call for everyone else's comfort. I'd earned this house, this solitude, this view. And if they wanted to turn up like conquerors, well then, they were about to learn something about the old man they thought they could walk over. This was going to be a vacation they wouldn't forget. I didn't run, I didn't panic, I didn't touch the guest room linens. Instead, I walked calmly to the utility closet, grabbed my old yellow legal pad, and sat at the kitchen island, same way I used to plan freeway overpasses back in the day. I sketched out a diagram of the house, marked the bedrooms, entry points, parking layout. Then I made 2 lists, things I could control and things I'd let slide for too damn long. I didn't get angry. Not yet. Anger is reactive, and I'd had enough of that for one lifetime. No. What I felt was something colder, older, more useful. Resolve. First thing on my list, document everything. I set up the front-facing camera on my phone and did a slow, deliberate walkthrough of the house. Date stamped, time logged. I narrated as I went. No one else present. House empty, property unoccupied except by me, legal homeowner. Condition, clean, undisturbed, no food prepared, no rooms assigned. It wasn't just for the court, though that thought had already started forming. It was for myself. A record of peace before the storm. Because make no mistake, a storm was coming. 15 people. I couldn't even name 8. Brian was bringing not just family, but his network, the word he used when describing people he might leverage for clout. Friends, co-workers, online connections, strangers, and they were going to treat my home like a rental with maid service. I knew this because they'd done it before. Not to this scale, not this brazen, but I'd seen the signs. Brian had hosted a family weekend at my old house once while I was away. I returned early to find red Solo cups in the bushes, a broken lamp, and 2 girls passed out on my living room rug. When I'd asked him what happened, he laughed and said, "Just a chill get-together, Richard. No big deal." That had been 6 years ago. This time I had leverage. This time the house was in my name, fully paid for, no shared ownership, no ambiguous arrangements. This time, I had a plan. The gate buzzer rang at 3:47 p.m. He was early. I let it buzz 4 times before answering. Then I clicked on the intercom. "Brian," I said calmly. "Hey, Richard, open up. We've got a line of cars behind us." I pressed the video feed. 3 SUVs, a minivan, and a Tesla sat bumper to bumper on the private drive. Brian in front, Jessica in the passenger seat, sunglasses too big for her face, already holding up her phone, recording. Probably a vacation haul video or some nonsense. I took a breath. "You're not on the guest list," I said. There was a pause. "The what?" he said, the grin dropping from his voice. "This is a private residence. Guests are by invitation. You're not on the list. No one is." "Richard," he said, using my name like a threat. "Don't be ridiculous. We're here. We drove all day. Just open the gate." I pressed the buzzer again, not without a reservation. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." "You can't be... Are you kidding me with this? What kind of stunt is this?" "Not a stunt," I said. "Just boundaries. You'll need to leave." The camera showed movement. Jessica leaned over him, waving frantically. "Rick," she chirped. "Come on, it's us. I brought those rosemary crackers you like and a bottle of that Pinot Noir from Paso Robles." I didn't respond. I ended the call. Then I opened the side app on my phone and activated the gate's auto-lock sequence. The drive was theirs now. for 5 minutes at most. I watched them on the security monitor. Brian jumped out of his car, paced. I could hear his voice through the intercom mic. Loud, incredulous, theatrical. He's lost it. He's gone totally rogue. Jessica started filming herself. Day 1 of the beach trip, and we're being blocked by the gate. This might be the most surreal thing I've ever experienced. Her tone was part laughing, part crafting the next wave of public sympathy. She was building a narrative. I recognized it because I'd seen it work before, on social media, on family, even on me. The others began getting out of their cars. Luggage doors opened. Someone's dog barked. The kids, 2 of them, maybe 3, ran around on the drive. Unaware of the tension, a tall guy with an undercut and board shorts knocked on the keypad as if it were a vending machine. I took another sip of water, calm as a surgeon. Then I dialed the non-emergency line for the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. "Hi," I said. "My name is Richard Clark. I'm the legal owner of 1441 Shorebreak Lane. I have a group of uninvited individuals attempting to access the property and refusing to leave. I've locked the gate. Can you send a deputy to help de-escalate?" The dispatcher asked for details. Number of people, length of time, any threats. I gave her everything. When I hung up, I went out onto the deck. From that vantage point, I could just see the tops of the vehicles on the drive, still parked, still waiting for me to cave. I didn't. At 4:12, the sheriff's cruiser appeared at the far end of the drive. It pulled up slowly, lights off, no sirens, just presence. Brian didn't see it at first. Neither did Jessica, but the undercut guy did. He stopped waving at the keypad and stepped back like it burned. The deputy stepped out, young, built like a high school quarterback, with the quiet confidence of someone used to dealing with noisy situations. He approached Brian first. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I could see the shift. Brian's arms flailed less. His stance softened. Jessica stopped filming. After 5 minutes, the deputy buzzed the intercom. "Mr. Clark?" "Yes." "This is Deputy Ames with the sheriff's office. Would you mind opening the gate? I'd like to speak with you directly." I paused. "Only you," I said. He nodded into the camera. I clicked the remote, and the gate opened just enough for his cruiser to slip through. A minute later, he stood on my front steps. "Thanks for calling," he said. "Can I come in?" I let him in. He walked through the foyer, noted the stacked boxes, the pristine space, the absence of guest preparation. "Just moved in?" 3 days ago." He nodded. "Want to tell me what's going on?" So I did. Not emotionally, not defensively, just the facts. I even showed him the footage from the security cameras, the intercom call, and the call log on my phone. Everything by the book. When I finished, he stood for a moment, arms crossed. "You want them removed?" "I want them gone, and I want it documented. There's a history here. I expect they'll escalate." He nodded. "You're well within your rights. Property line begins at the gate. No entry without permission." He pulled out his notepad. "I'll have a word with them. If they refuse, I'll issue a trespass warning and stand by while they leave. If they come back, we escalate." I exhaled slowly. Not relief, just confirmation. From the window, I watched Deputy Ames walk back down the drive. He gestured for Brian and the group to gather. They did. Heads leaned in. A few voices rose in protest. One of the kids began to cry. Then slowly, the group dispersed. Suitcases loaded back into trunks. Doors slammed. Voices got louder, more desperate. But they left. One by one, the cars pulled out, back down the drive, out onto the main road. At 4:47 p.m., silence returned. Deputy Ames returned briefly to hand me the incident number. "They won't be back tonight," he said. "But keep your cameras on. If anything changes, call us." I thanked him and walked him to the door. Then I turned around and looked at my house. My quiet, peaceful, earned it every damn day house. And I smiled. Not from joy, From the knowledge that I was just getting started. They were gone, but not defeated. I knew Brian well enough to understand that. He'd never been the kind of man to accept a clear, lawful no. He'd simmer, recast the story in his favor, and wait for the next opportunity to flip the narrative. So I spent Saturday morning doing something I hadn't done in years. Building a case. Not just for the courts, though I was already drafting that, but for myself. For the Richard who had ignored his instincts too many times. The Richard who'd swallowed his discomfort for family harmony. The Richard who needed, finally, to see the full picture. I started by opening an old cardboard box, marked Tax Docs, Personal. It had followed me through 4 moves, but hadn't been touched since Emily passed. Inside were receipts, bank transfers, printed emails, handwritten notes from Camille, even some old birthday cards from Brian, the kind that make a performance of affection. Buried near the bottom was a spreadsheet I hadn't seen since 2019. Family assistance, running log. It had 4 columns: date, recipient, purpose, amount, and a 5th, repayment promised. That column, more than anything, told the story, because over and over again it said yes, followed by nothing. January 2017, Brian. Loan to cover tax shortfall, $5,200. Yes. March 2018, Camille. Tuition deposit for Ella, $3,000. Yes. July 2018, Brian. Car repair, transmission, $1,800. Yes. October 2019, Jessica. Down payment help, $12,000. Yes. April 2020, Brian. Business bridge loan, $25,000. Yes. June 2020, Brian. Emergency medical, Emily. $1,600. No. Gift. And on. 37 entries in total, some big, some small. Most signed only with verbal acknowledgement. I'd trusted them to mean what they said. Trusted Brian specifically. I tallied the totals. $246,750, not including Emily's final hospital bills, which I never logged because they didn't need logging. Even in death, she didn't owe me anything. I took a deep breath and added one more line to the spreadsheet. October 14th, 2025. Brian. Attempted trespass. Misuse of private property. Uninvited stay. $0. No. It didn't have a dollar amount, but it had cost me something. My trust, my patience, maybe even the final remnants of any relationship worth salvaging. I poured a cup of black coffee and stepped onto the deck. The ocean was calm. It always surprised me how different it could look from one day to the next. Yesterday had been blustery, aggressive, the waves coming in fast and angry. Today was still, soft gray light, slow, even breakers, a kind of hush over everything. I'd grown up near the water, but I'd never owned it like this, not until now, and I wasn't going to let a pack of freeloaders turn it into a staging ground for their next TikTok campaign. I took a picture of the water with my phone, then walked back inside and started a private Google Drive folder titled Home Defense Q4 2025. Into it went the incident report from the sheriff's office, screenshots of Jessica's social media video, still live, still smug, the security footage from the front gate, my financial spreadsheet audio files from voicemails I'd saved from Brian over the years, a photo of the signed deed to the Villa 1 file after another, like laying bricks. I knew what Brian's next move would be. If I didn't cave, he'd paint me as cold, distant, unforgiving. He'd lean on the memory of Camille, on Emily. He'd mention the kids and family values and throw around words like abandonment or grudge. He'd twist the facts until they looked like resentment. So I prepared. By evening, I'd also drafted a letter, not to him, not yet, to Jessica's parents. I'd met them once, seemed nice enough, pleasant people from Temecula. We'd spoken briefly at Jessica and Brian's second wedding, back in 2021. That night they told me I was generous, that Jessica and Brian had really landed on their feet after Camille's passing. I remember feeling grateful at the time, grateful that someone else saw the loss, that someone else knew there'd been pain behind all the niceties. But now I needed something else from them. Not money, not validation, perspective. If this whole charade was really just Jessica's idea of family time, then maybe I'd been too harsh. But if, as I suspected, it was another power play orchestrated by Brian, then I needed the pieces. I kept the letter short. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Harlow, I hope this note finds you well. I'm writing regarding your daughter Jessica and her husband, Brian Miller. There was a situation at my property this past Friday involving an attempted uninvited group stay. Law enforcement was involved. I'd prefer not to escalate further, but I'm seeking clarification. Were you aware of a 3-week group vacation planned at my home in Carmel to begin on October 13th? Were you or your family included in any such arrangements? Thank you for any insight you can offer. I'm simply trying to understand the scope of what was planned and whether this was a miscommunication or something more deliberate. Sincerely, Richard Clark. I printed 2 copies, one for mailing, one for my records. At 9:10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Brian. This time it was a voice memo, not a text. Richard, you really need to think about what you're doing here. You've embarrassed my wife, created unnecessary drama, and frankly acted like a bitter old man. We just wanted some family time. If this is about control or some misplaced power trip, fine. But know this, you're not going to come out looking good. People are already asking questions. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I played it twice, then saved the file and backed it up to my home defense folder. His voice had changed. Gone was the laugh, the faux charm. What remained was the quiet fury of a man used to getting his way. I shut off the lights and walked to the window. The sea was pitch black now, moonlight catching only the crests. But I knew the rhythm. I'd watched it long enough to understand it. Tide goes out, tide comes in, and sometimes you have to build the seawall yourself. Sunday morning arrived with fog so thick it seemed to wrap around the house like insulation. I stood barefoot on the patio with my coffee, listening to the muffled roar of the Pacific. The surf was out there somewhere, just beyond the white haze, like a memory you couldn't quite touch. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. Not lonely. Not yet. But alone in a way that carried weight. Brian hadn't called again. Jessica hadn't posted any new videos, at least not ones I could find. But I knew what that meant. They were regrouping, retooling the narrative. There would be a new angle, a revised story. I wasn't the only one working in the quiet. I went back inside and checked the front gate camera. No movement. Good. I made eggs and toast and sat down at the kitchen island, opening the spiral-bound notebook I'd started keeping. My old habits die hard. For years, I kept daily field journals when I worked on large infrastructure projects. Notations on concrete strength, site hazards, subcontractor disputes. Those notebooks had saved me more than once when someone tried to rewrite history on a change order. This new journal wasn't about steel or soil compaction. It was about remembering who I was before Brian started twisting the definition of family. October 15th, 2025. No contact from Brian since Friday. One voice memo, logged and saved. Jessica silent. No social media posts in 48 hours. Letter to Harlow's mailed. Expected response within 5 business days. No other visitors. No family. No friends. House secure. I paused, pen resting on the page. Then I added, and for the first time in a long while, I feel strangely grounded. I meant it. I wasn't at peace, not yet. But the act of reclaiming my boundaries, of defining the limits of what I would and would not tolerate, had given me something back. A spine I hadn't realized had softened. After breakfast, I turned to the practical. I called my attorney. Howard Brennan was one of the few people I trusted implicitly. He'd helped me structure Camille's inheritance, and he'd been at my side during Emily's estate planning, right through to the bitter end. He never judged, He just listened carefully and thought in straight lines. He picked up on the second ring. "Richard," he said warmly, "I was just reading a headline about you." "That's a hell of a greeting." He chuckled. "Local paper's online blog. Something about a retired engineer and a beach house blow-up. Doesn't name names, but it's clearly you. Looks like your son-in-law's been busy." "Busy lying, yeah." I gave him the full account. Friday's standoff, the trespass, the sheriff's report, the voicemail threat. I even emailed over the incident number in the beginning of my evidence folder. Howard listened silently. When I was finished, he said, "Let's get ahead of this." "Already started?" "Good man. I'll draft a cease and desist letter for Brian and Jessica by end of day Monday. We'll include language around defamation, harassment, and the unauthorized use of your image or property for commercial purposes. I'll also recommend a formal no-contact directive if this escalates." He paused. "But Richard, just so we're clear, if you want to pursue civil damages, especially related to previous financial gifts, we'll need to prove intent. That those funds weren't freely given, but offered with the expectation of repayment." "They were," I said, "and I have notes, emails, in some cases, texts. Start gathering. If we go that route, I want our evidence clean." I hung up and stared at the window for a long moment. Somewhere offshore, the fog was beginning to burn away. The edges of the horizon showed hints of blue. What had started as a surprise visit had now become a legal preamble. And the truth was, I felt ready for it. I spent the rest of the morning digging into my email archives. Keyword searches for loan, help, just until, and we'll pay you back. Brian had never been subtle. He'd built his pleas on guilt and urgency. Most came during Emily's worst months, when I didn't have the bandwidth to argue. Each message read like a script. "Jessica's car is toast. We're stranded. Any chance you could wire 2 kills by tomorrow morning? The startup didn't get the next round of funding. Short term. Just need to cover the mortgage until I land something else. You're the only one we can trust. We'll pay you back, Richard. You know we will. Just not right now." Even the punctuation felt manipulative. Casual, familiar, presumptive. One email from 2022 stood out. "Think of it as investing in the future. If we get through this year, I swear I'll make it up to you. You've been like a father to me since Emily passed. Please don't shut the door now." Like a father. That one stung, because I'd never asked him to call me Dad, but I'd tried. God help me, I'd tried. That same year, he took Jessica to Maui for her birthday. I remember the photos, the infinity pool, the champagne toast, the drone shots from their rented Jeep. I saved everything into my digital folder, gave it its own subdirectory, Emotional Leverage, 2020-2023. Naming things gave me clarity, made it feel less personal. Because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about narrative. And Brian had been scripting mine for too long. At 3:15 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I checked the transcript. "Hi, Mr. Clark. This is Amy from the Monterey Coast Journal. I'm working on a piece about intergenerational wealth and family conflict, and I'd love to get your side of a story that's been gaining traction online. I understand if you're not ready to speak, but the record would benefit from your voice." I stared at the screen, both amused and appalled. Brian's antics had made the local news. Not front page, perhaps, but click-worthy. Another data point in the rich old man versus struggling family narrative that Americans love to chew on. But here's what they didn't know. That struggling family had spent more on luxury vacations in 2 years than I'd spent furnishing this house. That every gift came with a whispered promise to pay me back. Always in the future, always once things settled down. That I'd buried my own grief for 2 years to make space for theirs. I didn't call the reporter back. Not yet. But I didn't delete the voicemail either. I had a feeling I'd need her before this was over. That night, I made a simple dinner. grilled salmon, spinach sautéed in garlic, and a glass of Syrah. I ate it on the patio as the fog rolled back in, the world disappearing again into mist. From somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked, just settling. Still, I got up and double-checked the locks, not because I expected Brian, but because old instincts die hard, and this house finally was mine. By Monday morning, the gloves were off. I was in the middle of making a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed, this time with a link, not from Brian, not from Jessica, but from Linda Kroll, a former colleague of mine from Caltrans, now retired in Arizona. We hadn't spoken in over a year. "Hey, Richard. Just saw this going around. Didn't think it sounded like you. Thought you should know." I clicked the link. It was a blog post from some lifestyle site I'd never heard of, Modern Family Realities, written by a guest contributor who went by the name A West Coast Dad 2.0. But I didn't need a byline to recognize Brian's voice. "We thought we were going to visit family. Instead, we were treated like criminals. 15 of us, including small children, turned away at the gate of a multi-million-dollar mansion owned by my late wife's father. He called the police on us, claimed it was trespassing. It was humiliating and cruel. We weren't there to take. We were there to connect, to heal, to be together." He'd even included photos. Jessica's tearful face in the SUV, an old snapshot of Camille and Emily on the beach, and a cropped image of my villa, taken from the road at sunset, with just enough warmth to look wistful. It had all the trappings of an emotional hit piece. No names, but enough context clues to make it obvious, especially to the dozens of people who'd already commented. "Boomers have no heart. Money makes people forget who raised them. Your kids are lucky to have you, man." It was spreading, and not just socially. I checked Google News. 2 local stations had picked it up as a viral family rift story. They were quoting Brian's post, not the police report, not my version, because mine wasn't public, yet. I sat there at the island, the sun just beginning to stretch across the marble countertops, and realized this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a campaign. Brian was trying to control the narrative, again, only this time, not just within the family. Now he wanted the world to see him as the victim, which meant I had to decide, stay quiet, let the storm pass, and preserve whatever shards of privacy I had left, or speak. Speak not out of spite, but out of clarity. So I opened my laptop. Signed into Facebook. The account I rarely used, mostly for alumni groups and birthday reminders. I'd never posted much, just a few photos, some old engineering awards, a memorial post after Emily passed. Today, I wrote something new. "Dear friends, you may have seen recent posts circulating online about a supposed family incident at my home in Carmel. Since some of you know me well, and others only know what's being shared, I thought I'd provide some clarity. I recently purchased my retirement home. It is not a family property. It is not a rental. It is my private residence. On Friday, a group of 15 people arrived unannounced, expecting a 3-week stay. No invitation had been given. No agreement had been made. When asked to leave, they refused. The sheriff's department was contacted, and the matter was peacefully resolved. I have spent the past 6 years providing over $290,000 in financial assistance to this same group, including medical expenses, housing, education, and personal loans. None have been repaid. I am not angry. I am not vengeful. But I am done being manipulated by narratives that erase the truth in favor of clicks and pity. I have no desire to air every detail in public, but I do want to say this. Boundaries are not cruelty. Saying no is not abandonment. And generosity, when exploited long enough, eventually becomes a closed door. Thank you to those who've reached out with kindness. I'm well. I'm clear-eyed. And I'm finally, at last, standing on my own 2 feet. Richard Clark. I read it over 3 times before hitting post. My hands didn't shake. They felt calm, focused. By noon, the post had been shared 29 times. Linda commented. So did a few old friends from Emily's school. Even my former supervisor, Carol Weber, wrote, "Proud of you, Richard. About time someone showed what healthy boundaries look like." But the best message came in private. From my nephew David, Camille's cousin. We hadn't spoken in a while, not out of distance, just life moving on. "Uncle Richard, just saw your post. Sorry for everything. I remember how you helped Camille through college. You were always solid. If you need anything, or if you want a real visit, I'd love to come down. Just say when." That one hit me hard. Because for all the noise Brian and Jessica had made about family, it was David, the kid who used to spend summers digging holes on my front lawn, pretending to be an archaeologist, who actually remembered what family meant. I told him the guest room would be ready whenever he wanted it. No games, no 3-week stay, just a weekend, with a bottle of wine and conversation, and respect. I spent the rest of the day working with Howard. He finalized the cease and desist letter, which we had couriered to both Brian and Jessica's addresses. The letter spelled out the trespass, the misrepresentation, and the emotional distress their public campaign had caused. More importantly, it gave them an out. Retract the posts, apologize, walk away quietly, or escalate and face a defamation suit backed by 6 years of meticulous records. Howard's exact words, "Let's give them the dignity of an exit ramp, even if they don't take it." I nodded. Because I wasn't looking to crush Brian, I was looking to end the story, the false one. The one where I was cruel for finally choosing peace. By sundown, the fog had rolled back in. The deck was slick with dew. I poured a single glass of wine, same Syrah as the night before, and sat out there with a light jacket and the sounds of the surf. The gate stayed quiet. The inbox, too. For once, it felt like the storm had passed without tearing the roof off. But I knew Brian. He wouldn't let it end just yet. He'd always needed the last word. What he didn't know was that I'd already written mine. It was backed by affidavits, financial records, and signed legal documents. And if he pushed again, he'd hear it loud and clear. In court. Tuesday morning, I woke to silence. No new voicemails, no texts, no posts. My Facebook response had quieted the mob, at least temporarily. The narrative Brian had tried to spin, a poor widower cast out by a heartless millionaire, was unraveling under the weight of receipts and restraint. But I knew him too well to think it was over. This was the regrouping phase, the part where he called in favors, rewrote the script again. He wouldn't strike back immediately. No, Brian was the type to wait until people got bored, then repackage the story with new packaging and better lighting, so I stayed ready. By 10 a.m., I was on a video call with Howard. "I've drafted a secondary action," he said, adjusting his glasses and turning his screen to show a scanned letter. "This is for a formal accounting demand. Not a lawsuit yet, but a signal that we're prepared to seek civil restitution for financial abuse if this keeps up." He sipped from a white mug that said, "Trust me, I'm a lawyer," and added, "It's also good leverage. We're showing the full hand without playing it. Yet." "I don't want to drag this through court if I don't have to," I said. "You won't have to," he replied, "unless Brian decides he's bulletproof." He tapped the document. "But this? This makes it clear he isn't." The official letter summarized 6 years of financial support, with attached certified bank records for each transfer. The tone was professional, not personal. It didn't mention Emily or Camille. It didn't even reference the villa. It simply said, "You took what was not yours under false pretenses, and now the books are being audited." I authorized Howard to send it. I spent the afternoon cleaning. Not just surface stuff. Deep cleaning. Polishing the banisters. Vacuuming behind the furniture. Dusting the trim in the hallway. I washed every dish, reorganized the pantry, even wiped the underside of the stovetop hood. It wasn't about the house. It was about taking control of something. Each drawer I straightened felt like a small repair to the part of me that had allowed Brian's demands to go on for so long. Because here's what no one tells you about being generous. If you don't draw the line yourself, the people benefiting from your kindness will never draw it for you. I thought of Emily often as I cleaned. She used to say I was pathologically helpful. I could fix anything, plumbing, finances, schedules, but never seemed to fix my own boundaries. You have to let people learn on their own, she once told me. You can't keep patching everyone's roofs while yours caves in. At the time, I'd laughed. Now I saw the wisdom in her words more clearly than ever. That evening, I received an unexpected call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Camille, not my daughter, of course. Camille had died 7 years earlier from a sudden brain aneurysm. No, this Camille was her namesake, my second cousin's daughter, named in honor of mine. She was now 26 and living in Los Angeles, working in nonprofit fundraising. Her voice was soft but steady. "Uncle Richard," she said, "I just wanted to check in. I saw everything. Online, the posts, the responses. I know we haven't talked much, but I wanted you to know I believe you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you," I said after a moment. "That means more than you know." "I remember when you helped pay for my study abroad trip to Spain," she said. "My dad never told me until years later. You didn't ask for thanks. You just helped." I smiled. "Well, you were a good kid. You still are. I'm not saying I know what it's like to be in your shoes," she added, "but I know what it's like to have family who confuse love with access." That hit me. She asked if she could visit, just for a weekend. Said she wanted to see the house, see the ocean. Not for content, not for some curated moment, but to reconnect. We picked a date, 2 weekends from now. I told her I'd have fresh towels ready and her own room prepared. And she said, "Thanks, but I'll bring my own towels. I just want to talk." After the call ended, I sat for a while in the quiet of my study. The fog was rolling in again, gentle this time, like a soft return. And for the first time in days, my thoughts didn't race toward defense or strategy. They just settled. I thought about how quickly a reputation can be hijacked when people forget how to ask for things with grace. I thought about how often guilt is dressed up as obligation. And I thought about all the times I'd been told, "Well, you have the money, so what's the problem?" As if generosity was the tax I owed for being responsible. But most of all, I thought about how little people understand what it takes to build a life that's quiet and dignified. It doesn't just happen. You fight for it, not loudly, not with fists, but with decisions, with restraint, with the quiet courage to say, "No, this is mine." Later that night, my phone buzzed. An email from Jessica. Subject line, "What happened?" I hesitated before opening it. My stomach tightened the way it does before a meeting you already know won't end well. Inside was a single paragraph. "Richard, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry things went the way they did. I didn't know Brian had framed it as a family trip. I thought you were expecting us. I realize now that I overstepped, that we all did. I can't speak for Brian, but I wanted to say thank you for everything you did for Emily. I was always grateful, even if I never said it right. We won't bother you again. Jessica." I read it twice. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo the live streams or the blog posts or the yoga in my bedroom nonsense. But it was, for once, a step in the right direction. I forwarded it to Howard. Then I let myself feel something rare these days. A small, tentative sense of relief. The storm wasn't over. But the wind had changed. And for now, that was enough. Wednesday arrived with a light rain, the kind that paints everything darker and more honest. The flagstones on the back patio glistened. The rosemary bush near the steps bowed slightly under the weight of the water. I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing out a coffee mug, watching as the ocean dissolved into mist. There were no texts, no voicemails, no new threats. And yet, I didn't relax. There's a particular kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like waiting. Jessica's email had been a crack in the wall, a sliver of decency. But from Brian? Nothing. Not an apology, not a retraction, not a single acknowledgement of what he'd done. Howard called just after 8:00. "Morning, Richard. Got a response to the demand letter." I straightened in my chair. "And?" "Well, technically, it wasn't from Brian." His lawyer responded. A young guy, probably new to this kind of case. The tone was cautious. No admissions, no denials. But a request. Would we consider private mediation instead of escalation? I raised an eyebrow. So he wants to settle without admitting anything. Correct. But more importantly, Howard continued, he wants confidentiality. That tells me Brian knows he overplayed his hand. I let that sit for a moment. So what's your instinct? I asked. That we proceed carefully. Agree to talk, not to forgive. Get everything in writing. And most of all, don't back down. Not after what he tried to do to your name. Howard was right. Brian didn't want to talk because he was sorry. He wanted to talk because the weight of documentation had finally shifted the power balance. The man who barged into my house expecting the master bedroom was now asking for a conversation. I told Howard to move forward with the preliminary mediation terms, on one condition: all defamatory content, public and private, must be removed before any meetings take place. No games, no dangling apologies, just proof of good faith. Howard agreed. By noon, I was back in the study, the rain still tapping gently at the windows. I turned on the radio, classical station, low volume. Bach filled the space between my thoughts, and I started writing something I hadn't allowed myself to touch in years. A letter to Emily. Not out loud, not for anyone else to see, just for me. Dear Em, it's been 3 years and 6 months since you left. I still catch myself reaching for the phone when something funny happens, or when the news gets weird, or when Camille calls, and I want you to hear her voice too. Some days it's easier. Some days I can't breathe. This week was one of the hard ones. Brian tried to turn the world against me. Again. Claimed I'd abandoned the family. Tried to make me the villain in a story that never belonged to him in the first place. But here's what I finally did, Em. I said no. And I meant it. For the first time since you passed, I didn't write a check. I didn't smooth it over. I didn't give him what he wanted just to keep the peace. I stood in my own house and claimed it for myself, for my sanity, for my future. I don't know what you'd think of all this. I like to believe you'd be proud, that you'd understand this wasn't about withholding love. It was about preserving dignity. Mine, yours. I miss you every day. But I think I'm finally learning how to live without apologizing for surviving you. Love, Dad. I placed the letter in the drawer with her photo, next to the small keepsake box that held her old college ring and the note she'd left in the hospital. Just one line, scribbled in shaky handwriting. Be good to Brian. He's trying. He had been. Maybe. Once. But somewhere along the line, trying turned into taking. And I couldn't carry that for him anymore. That afternoon, as the rain let up, I stepped out onto the deck to breathe in the wet air. The clouds had broken into heavy gray sheets, leaving streaks of light across the water. I leaned against the railing and let the silence fill me. Then the doorbell rang. Not the buzzer at the gate, the doorbell. I turned slowly, heart kicking once, sharply. I hadn't given the code to anyone new. The keypad logs didn't show an override. I checked the monitor. No car in the drive. No figure at the door, just a package. I opened the door cautiously. A white envelope sat on the mat. No return address. Handwritten. To Richard Clark. I brought it inside, dried it carefully on the counter, and opened it. Inside was a single typed page. Richard, you win. You always had the upper hand with your records and your principles. I just wanted some time with people I cared about. Maybe I went about it wrong. Maybe I overreached. But you could have handled it differently too. I'll take down the posts. I won't fight the mediation. But don't expect an apology. I don't believe I'm the only one at fault. Brian. It wasn't handwritten. It wasn't signed. But the bitterness was unmistakable. He had conceded, but not yielded. And that told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. The truce had come, but not the peace. I passed the letter to Howard for documentation. He'd know what to make of it legally. Me? I put the kettle on. Then I sat down and opened a clean page in my notebook. Notes. Next steps. Follow up on mediation timeline. Update will and estate plan to reflect current events. Reassess emergency contacts. Plan guest room setup for Camille Naratu's visit. Continue journal entries daily. That last one felt important. Because even after the crisis fades, even after the paperwork's filed and the news cycle moves on, you still have to live with what happened. And writing it down helped me remember that I wasn't just protecting my house. I was reclaiming my self-respect, one clean page at a time. Friday morning came with a shift in the air, one of those subtle, almost imperceptible changes that tells you a season's about to turn. The sky had gone from silver to that deep, aching blue that only appears after a week of rain. The fog had lifted completely. The light was sharper, almost unforgiving. I opened all the windows, let the salt air in. I hadn't realized how stale the house had gotten until that moment. The night before, Howard had called to confirm mediation was scheduled for next Wednesday, 2 o'clock, neutral location in Seaside. He told me to bring nothing but myself. That everything we needed was already in the file. All we had to do was sit across the table from Brian and let the weight of the truth do the talking. Still, I spent most of Friday morning reviewing the documents again. I'm not the type to show up to battle unarmed, even if the war has already been won on paper. By noon, I was restless, couldn't sit still. Couldn't look at another spreadsheet or email or notarized affidavit. So I did what I used to do when Camille was young, and I needed to think. I started fixing something that wasn't broken. In this case, the sliding door track off the guest room. It didn't really need attention, but the wheels had started to catch ever so slightly. And once I noticed it, I couldn't leave it alone. I laid out the tools, removed the door, cleaned the grit from the rollers, realigned the rail, and reinstalled everything with the care of someone who had nowhere else to go but back to their own thoughts. And that's where I found it again. That old internal friction. That echo of shame, not for anything I'd done, but for how long I'd let things slide. I'd allowed Brian's entitlement to grow roots in my life. Why? Because I was afraid. Not of him, but of being alone. That's the part no one talks about when they praise boundaries and bold decisions. The part where you sit in your clean, quiet house and wonder whether you'll ever hear from anyone again who doesn't want something from you. Because the truth is, family is a kind of gravity. Even when it pulls you in the wrong direction, you stay tethered. Because what's the alternative? Floating? I'd floated once already, after Emily died. For 6 months I lived like a man underwater, moving slow, speaking soft, forgetting things mid-sentence. Brian had stepped into that fog and made himself useful, attentive, present. At least at first. He brought over groceries, took my car in for service, picked up Camille from the airport when I couldn't face the crowd, and then gradually, the dynamic shifted. His visits came with requests. His concern came with expectations, and I, desperate to keep the connection alive, said yes, again and again, until yes became the only language between us. It had taken a $2 million villa and a standoff at my own front door to finally say no in a way that stuck. That evening, I grilled chicken on the patio, ate outside, watched the sun dip into the Pacific with the quiet reverence of someone watching a sermon. I didn't feel victorious. I felt real, solid in a way I hadn't in years. My phone buzzed around 7. Camille, the younger. Just confirming next weekend. Still good? I'll bring wine, and I can cook Saturday if you're game. Pasta's my love language. I smiled. Confirmed. Guest room ready. I'll make breakfast. You handle dinner. Deal. Also, I saw Jessica's retraction post. Short and bitter, but it's there. Public. Respect. I hadn't seen it yet. I opened Facebook and searched her profile. Sure enough, there it was, pinned at the top. To clarify, earlier posts I made about a family matter omitted key details and misrepresented events. I regret any confusion or distress caused. The situation has been resolved privately. No apology, no specifics. But it was enough. The internet rarely gets endings. This one at least had a dotted line, and beneath it, dozens of comments from her followers. I knew something was off. Glad you're taking responsibility. Lesson learned, I hope. Brian hadn't posted anything. His page had gone quiet. His profile photo was still the same. Him, arms around Jessica, with a caption about resilience from 6 months ago. I doubted he'd issue a public correction. That would require humility. A quality he'd never needed to cultivate because there had always been someone nearby to clean up after him. Until now. I shut the laptop, poured myself a finger of bourbon, and stood at the window, watching the surf roll in against the rocks, endless and unbothered. When Emily was sick, she once told me, "You're strong, Dad, but you don't know it yet. One day you'll stop trying to earn love and just receive it. That's what strength looks like." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought love was something you worked for, paid for, proved with action and sacrifice. But now, standing in the quiet comfort of a home I'd earned with 40 years of unglamorous effort, I realized she'd been right. Love isn't something you keep buying to make sure it stays. Love doesn't ask for the deed to your peace. It just shows up, empty-handed, asking nothing but time. The sliding door moved smooth as silk behind me. I locked it gently and let the house be still. Wednesday came fast. I woke up early, even though mediation wasn't until 2. I always did on important days, habit from a career spent reviewing bridge specs and traffic flow projections before sunrise. You don't show up cold to a structural inspection. You warm up your mind. You walk the span in your head. You test the weight of every joint before anyone else gets a chance. By 6:30, I was dressed in slacks and a crisp button-down. Not a suit. That would have been too much. But not jeans either. I wanted to look exactly like what I was. A man who took this seriously, but wasn't there to grovel or bluster. Just to finish what needed finishing. Howard had told me not to expect much from Brian. He'll likely be defensive. He may come in hot. Just remember, you've already won the moral ground. Don't trade it for the temporary satisfaction of a shouting match. I promised I wouldn't, and I meant it. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't bracing for impact. The meeting was held at a private legal office just off Fremont Boulevard, neutral territory, mid-level firm that handled estate disputes and quiet family battles no one wanted in court. The kind of place with frosted glass conference rooms and stale peppermint in square dishes. Howard and I arrived 10 minutes early. Brian was late, of course. Exactly 7 minutes late. Deliberate. Just enough to register disrespect without seeming petulant. He walked in with a lawyer I didn't recognize. A young man in a navy suit who looked like he was used to whispering instructions to clients beneath the hum of air purifiers. Brian's face was drawn, less tanned than I remembered. The confidence was still there, but thinner now, like a painting where the brush strokes were starting to show through. He didn't shake my hand, didn't look at me either. We sat. The mediator, a calm, middle-aged woman named Lillian who'd clearly done this 100 times, opened with a few words. Ground rules, civility, purpose. Then Howard laid it out. He spoke for nearly 20 minutes, laid out the financial timeline, detailed the defamation claims, displayed the sheriff's incident report, and attached Jessica's public retraction, and finally slid across the table a new proposal. Not full restitution, but a structured settlement. 3 annual payments, Non-disclosure agreement. Public acknowledgement that statements had been inaccurate, with language carefully crafted not to ruin Brian's reputation, but to clarify mine. Brian didn't say anything for a while. Then he leaned back, crossed his arms, and said, "You make it sound like I'm a criminal." "No one's using that word," Lillian replied calmly. "This is about resolution." He stared at the papers. "I didn't think you'd go this far, Richard." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." He shook his head. "You could have called me. Before the police, before the posts. We could have handled this privately." I almost laughed. "Instead," I said, "you showed up at my house with 15 people and a list of demands. You broadcast my home on social media. You claimed public victimhood while standing in my kitchen barefoot and uninvited. What part of that was private?" His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Lillian stepped in again. "Let's stay focused on next steps." Brian picked up the papers and flipped through them like a man pretending to read. Then he said, "Fine." Just that. No apology, no reflection, just capitulation. And honestly, I didn't need more than that. We signed. He signed. His lawyer initialed each page like a notary of surrender. By the end of the hour, it was official. A full legal resolution. Enforceable. Complete. We stood. I nodded once in his direction. Not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. He didn't nod back. As I turned to leave, I heard him mutter under his breath to the mediator, "I hope I never end up like him." And I paused, just for a second. I could have kept walking. I could have let the insult hang unanswered. But I turned, met his eyes, and said quietly, clearly, "That's the first thing we've ever agreed on." He looked stunned for half a second, then blank, then angry. But I walked out without waiting for a response. Howard chuckled as we reached the parking lot. "That was a good line," he said. "I didn't rehearse it." "I know," he said. "That's what made it stick." The sun had broken through the morning haze. I stood there beside my car, letting the warmth hit my face, feeling something that had eluded me for weeks. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Closure. It wasn't perfect. It didn't undo the years of erosion. But it finally placed a period at the end of a sentence that had gone on far too long. That evening, back at the house, I opened a fresh bottle of red, turned off my phone, and wrote a new entry in my notebook. October 21st, 2025. Mediation complete. He showed up. He conceded. No apology, no ownership. But the truth is now documented and protected. The house is quiet. The air is clear. Next chapter begins tomorrow. I slept better that night than I had in months. No dreams, no wake-ups, just the rhythm of the ocean, and the feeling of finally having my home and my voice back. Saturday morning, the doorbell rang at 9:12 a.m. sharp. Not the gate buzzer, this time it was expected. Camille arrived with an overnight bag, a bottle of Pinot Noir under one arm, and the same open smile I remembered from the last time she visited. Years ago, back when Emily was still healthy, and the house in Sacramento still held its shape as home. "Uncle Richard," she said, standing on the front step in boots too clean for this part of the coast. "It smells like the sea and lemon polish in here. You've officially retired like a man with taste." I laughed and stepped aside to let her in. She was taller than I remembered, more poised. Not polished like Jessica. No fake lashes or sculpted nails, but solid in the way of someone who'd made it through their 20s without selling their soul. She wore a gray wool coat and a soft green scarf, and she carried herself like someone who didn't need to prove anything anymore. She turned a slow circle in the foyer, taking in the high beams, the driftwood mirror, the narrow glass vase full of dry reeds. "It's beautiful," she said, quiet now. "It feels like peace." That stopped me more than it should have, because she said it without irony, without sarcasm, as if she actually saw what I'd built here. "Thanks," I said, suddenly self-conscious. "Took a few decades." We spent most of the morning drinking coffee and catching up. She told me about her job at the nonprofit, some kind of regional fundraising coordinator for medical access programs. And I tried to follow, though most of the lingo made me feel 100 years old. She asked me about Emily. Not awkwardly, just gently. What was she like? At the end. I paused. It wasn't the question I expected. She was soft, I said finally. Not weak, just quiet. Thoughtful in a way she hadn't been before. Like the things that used to matter had thinned out, and what was left was kindness. Not to everyone, just to the people who didn't flinch from the truth. Camille nodded. I always admired her, she said, even when I was a kid. She never talked down to me. She didn't talk down to anyone, I said. That's why she and Brian fought so much. Camille didn't press, but I could see the question in her eyes. I told her the basics. Not the courtroom stuff, not yet, but enough. The trespass, the campaign, the retraction. She didn't flinch. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You did the right thing. A lot of people would have folded just to keep the illusion." I stared at her for a long moment. "What?" she said. "Just, you sound older than you should. That's all." She smiled. "Yeah, well, the illusion's never done much for me." After lunch, she unpacked in the guest room, tossed her duffel on the bed, lined up a toothbrush on the counter without ceremony. She treated the space like what it was, a guest room, not a second home, not a trophy. Just a place to rest. I hadn't realized how meaningful that would feel. That evening she made dinner. Homemade pasta, just like she'd promised. Garlic, olive oil, sun-dried tomatoes, a splash of red wine for the sauce. We ate on the back patio with sweaters and blankets, and 2 glasses of the wine she'd brought. Halfway through the meal, she looked out over the water and said, "I think you should write it down." "Write what?" "All of it. What happened. The whole thing. Not for revenge. For you." I stared at her. "You think anyone wants to read that?" She shrugged. "Doesn't matter. It's not for them. It's to remind you that you didn't imagine it. That the line you drew wasn't cruelty. It was healing. You'll forget that eventually. We always do. But if you write it down, you'll remember." I said nothing for a while. Just sipped my wine. Watched the tide come in under the moonlight. She was right, of course. Later, we washed dishes together. She sang to herself softly, some indie song I didn't know. When I asked if she wanted to watch a movie, she said, "No thanks. I'm happy just being here." She went to bed early, closed the door. I heard the low hum of a podcast playing through the wall. I stayed up a while longer, sat at the island with a pen and a fresh notebook, and I started writing. October 24th, 2025. There was a time when I believed kindness would always be enough, that if I kept giving, kept showing up, kept opening the door, the people I loved would eventually meet me halfway. But kindness without boundaries isn't generosity. It's erasure. I almost erased myself. Not anymore. The words came slowly at first, then faster. I didn't try to shape it into anything elegant. I just told the truth. Not for the courts, not for Howard, not even for Camille. For me. Because Camille had said something I couldn't forget. The illusion. That's what I'd been living in, wasn't it? This idea that family would always course correct, always come around, always mean well. But they don't. Not always. Some people need you to stay small so they can feel large. Some people only love you when you're useful, and the only way to end that cycle is to stop participating in it. I wrote for nearly an hour, and when I closed the notebook, my hand was sore. But my heart felt quieter. The house was still, and for once so was I. Camille left Sunday morning after one last cup of coffee on the deck. She hugged me tight. No pretense, no staged photos, no performative gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her cheek briefly brushing mine, For the clean towels, the clean air, and the clean slate. I smiled. You're welcome anytime, just maybe not with 14 others and a film crew. She laughed. No promises, but if I show up with a crew, they're here to deep clean your grout. I watched her drive off, a little hatchback disappearing down the curved drive, headlights briefly catching the edges of the cypress trees. When the gate clicked shut behind her, I stood in the doorway longer than I should have. Not out of sadness, just a kind of fullness, the kind you don't expect after something like this. For a long time, I thought loss hollowed you out permanently, that after Emily died, and after Camille, and after Brian became whatever he became, I'd be left with nothing but echoes and echoing disappointments. But standing there with sunlight warming the stone under my feet, I realized something different. You don't rebuild your life all at once. You do it in small, deliberate pieces. A notebook, a letter, a meal with someone who doesn't want anything from you but company. A door that opens and closes on your terms. That week, I kept writing. Just a few pages every night. No big speeches, no grand structure, just the truth, as plainly as I could tell it. The story of what happened, how I got here, how it started long before Brian's stunt, and how I'd kept feeding the beast out of fear of losing whatever scraps of family were left. And the more I wrote, the more I remembered. I remembered the Christmas in 2016 when Brian asked for $10,000 under the guise of a temporary cash flow gap, then took Jessica to Sonoma and posted photos of a spontaneous holiday retreat. I remembered Camille's birthday in 2019, my daughter Camille, not the younger one, when I offered to host at the house and Brian turned it into a chance to pitch me on investing in some app that never existed beyond a logo and a slide deck. I remembered the way he always leaned on words like legacy and trust and family vision, the way he dropped those phrases into conversation like baited hooks, the way I swallowed them again and again because the alternative was silence, and now that silence didn't scare me. Now, it felt like space. By Thursday, the legal paperwork was finalized. Howard sent me a clean copy of the settlement agreement, signed and scanned, with digital confirmation that Brian had wired the first installment of the repayment plan. Modest, but symbolic. Enough to mark the beginning of a new chapter, one not written in IOUs and blurred boundaries. In the email, Howard wrote, "You handled this with more grace than most. I've seen people tear each other apart over less. You didn't flinch, you just held the line." I replied simply, "Thank you. You helped me draw it." That afternoon, I went for a walk down Ocean Avenue. The storefronts were already shifting into their late autumn rhythm. Pumpkins in windows, spiced candles burning faintly behind glass, sweaters replacing sun hats in the boutique displays. I stopped by the little bookshop near the post office and picked up a blank journal, heavy linen cover, the kind that dares you to be honest on page 1. I also picked up a copy of a novel I'd always meant to read, something thick and patient, with slow chapters and unhurried sentences, the kind of book you don't skim. The woman at the counter asked if I wanted a receipt. "No thanks," I said. "I'm not planning to return any of it." She smiled. That's the best kind of purchase. When I got back to the house, I lit a fire, not because it was cold, but because I could. There's something satisfying about watching a thing burn down and knowing it's supposed to, that it isn't destruction. It's heat. It's light. It's what happens when you stop pretending a pile of wood is better left untouched. That evening, I sat by the fire with the new book, the new journal unopened beside me. I didn't write that night. I didn't need to. The house was quiet in the way it had been promised to be when I first bought it. Not empty, just mine. No one else's expectations. No unpaid debts masquerading as relationships. No one calling to ask for a little help. Just me, the ocean in the background, and the faint scent of cedar smoke in my sweater. Around midnight, I received one last message from Brian. No subject line, just a text. I don't get how you can throw away family like this, but I guess now I know where Emily got it from. I stared at it for a long time. Then I blocked the number. I didn't respond, not because I couldn't think of something to say, but because I finally understood I didn't owe him an answer. Not anymore. He had his narrative, and now I had mine. And mine didn't need a villain to be complete. It just needed a man who learned, finally, to stop making peace with people who demanded war. The next week came and went without a ripple. No calls, no letters, no unexpected packages, no legal surprises. Just days. Simple, good days. Mornings started with the same ritual. Coffee, toast, ocean. I'd take my mug out to the deck, breathe in the salted air, and listen to the rhythm of the tide like it was a living thing, trying to teach me something. Most days I wrote. Not always about the past, sometimes just fragments, memories of Emily's laugh, or the way Camille used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from soccer practice, or the way the light slanted across the kitchen floor around 4 o'clock in the fall. It was nothing I planned to publish, nothing I wanted anyone else to read. But the act of putting it down, of framing those moments with words, made the silence in the house feel earned, not empty. One afternoon I drove up to Pacific Grove, walked the trail by Lover's Point, bought a sandwich from a little deli that hadn't changed since 1992, sat on a bench overlooking the rocks and watched two seagulls fight over half a tortilla chip. I remember thinking, this is what peace looks like. Not grand, not dramatic, just normal. It took me longer than it should have to realize how abnormal things had been before. Not the noise, not the conflict, but the shape of my own tolerance. The way I'd trained myself to endure, to excuse, to hope people would eventually stop taking advantage if I just kept proving I was worth their love. But the thing about people like Brian is, they don't stop until you take the wheel back. And I had. Howard called the following Friday to confirm that Brian had made the second payment. Early, even. Likely a move to protect his own ego. Publicly, he'd gone quiet. The blog post was gone. The social media accounts inactive or scrubbed clean. He wasn't sorry, I knew that. But he was done trying to win the narrative. That was enough. Want to close the file? Howard asked. I paused. No, not yet. Leave it open. Just in case. Understood. That weekend I did something unexpected. I called Carol Weber, my old boss from Caltrans. She still lived in Sacramento, still ran half the engineering alumni events with her usual blend of sarcasm and bourbon. We'd kept in loose touch, holiday cards, birthday emails, but hadn't had a real conversation in years. She picked up on the second ring. Well, I'll be damned, she said. Richard Clark. I was just about to delete your contact as an act of closure. You say that every year, and every year you prove me right. We talked for an hour. She asked about Emily, about the house, about retirement. She told me her knees were going, but her wine cellar was intact. I told her she should come visit. I'll warn you now, I said. No private chef, no guest concierge. Just me and whatever I remember how to cook. I've eaten your food. I've had worse. Noted. She hesitated a second, then added, I saw the stuff online. The family drama. Of course she had. Looked ugly, she said, but you handled it better than most would. Didn't feel like it at the time. That's because you're not the type to gloat. There was a long pause. Then she said something that landed harder than she probably meant it to. You deserve to live the rest of your life in peace, Rich. Don't let anyone talk you out of that. I sat with that after we hung up. Because that's what this was really about, wasn't it? Not just boundaries. Not just money. Not even betrayal. It was about permission. Permission to stop explaining myself. Permission to protect my peace. Permission to want a life that didn't revolve around repairing other people's broken plans. I hadn't known I needed to hear it, but I did. The next morning I made a list. Not a big one. Just a few things I wanted to do now that the dust had settled. Things I don't owe anyone. My house, my silence, a second chance to people who abused the first, explanations, guilt, things I do owe myself, a walk every morning, music in the evenings, one good trip a year, clean floors, uncomplicated meals with people who care more about the conversation than the menu. It wasn't a roadmap, but it was a start. Later that day, I went into the guest room, opened the closet, and pulled out the extra sheets and towels I'd stored there during the Brian fiasco, the ones I'd bought when I thought I'd be hosting a house full of family for 3 weeks. I folded them all, put half back in the linen closet, donated the rest, let the room go back to being what it had always been, a spare room, not a revolving door. That night, I opened the new journal I'd bought in town and wrote just one sentence. I am no longer the bank, the fixer, or the stagehand in someone else's play. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't dramatic. But it was true. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. It was early November when I started getting the calls. Not from Brian, not from Jessica or her apology-averse circle of wellness grifters. These were quieter calls, from people who'd once stood beside me, colleagues, cousins, friends of Camille's I hadn't heard from since Emily's memorial service. They came one at a time, like cautious visitors knocking on the back door. A former neighbor from Sacramento, a retired contractor I'd worked with in 008, even the woman who used to run the front desk at Emily's old dental practice. They all had the same tone, gentle, tentative. I saw what happened, Richard. Hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to say, I get it. Some didn't say much more. Just checked in, left the door open. Others lingered. A man named Peter, who used to work with me on infrastructure grants, told me his daughter had done something similar, moved into his lake house without permission, and then spun the story into some social media tale of generational cruelty. He'd kept quiet at the time. Didn't want to make it worse. But you, he said, you handled it like a man with nothing left to prove. I didn't know how to respond to that. I still don't. Maybe I didn't need to, because what I heard, again and again, in their voices, wasn't admiration, it was relief. Relief that someone had said no, publicly, clearly, without a 10-minute speech about how family is complicated, and everyone makes mistakes. They'd all had their own Brians. Maybe not as bold, maybe not as public, but they'd lived the quiet erosion of being leaned on until their backs gave out. And now, they were watching someone, me, draw a line they wished they'd drawn years earlier. I didn't feel proud. I just felt connected for the first time in a long while. There's a loneliness that comes with being the one who stops the pattern. People don't throw parades for your boundaries. They call you bitter, cold, ungrateful. They say things like, after all we've done for you, and he used to be such a kind man. But then, slowly, if you hold your ground, the other voices come. Not loud, but true. That weekend, I went to the local market in Carmel, bought fresh halibut, rosemary, and a small lemon tart from the French woman who runs the bakery stall. When she asked if I had company coming, I said no, just cooking for myself. She smiled. Then make it extra pretty. You're worth the plating. That night I set the table for one. Linen napkin, wine glass, a proper plate. I lit a single candle, not because it was romantic, but because it reminded me that I wasn't just feeding a body. I was feeding a man who'd stopped apologizing for his own space. After dinner, I stepped out onto the deck and stood barefoot on the cold wood, breathing in the salt air until the sky turned fully dark. The ocean was still. For once, I didn't try to find meaning in it. It was just the sea, doing what it always did. Like me. The next morning, I opened the notebook again and started drafting a will update. Not the legal document, that was already done, but a version in plain language, the kind someone could read without needing a lawyer to translate it. I wrote it in the same tone I'd used to speak to Emily. This is what I want. No memorial unless it's over a meal, no speeches, no projections. The house goes to whoever respects it. If no one qualifies, sell it and donate the proceeds. Don't split heirlooms. If more than one person wants something, give it to neither. It wasn't about the thing anyway. Forgiveness isn't mandatory. Neither is staying in touch. But peace is a non-negotiable. It felt good, writing it that way, like I was still here, in control, not reduced to a fight over who got the teak sideboard or the watercolor from Half Moon Bay. The following Thursday, I received a letter in the mail. Not typed, not official. Handwritten, on soft paper, folded neatly in a plain envelope. From Jessica. Richard, I know the dust has settled, and maybe I should let it stay settled. But I wanted to say one thing that doesn't fit neatly into a retraction post or a lawyer's letter. You were right, about the house, about the assumptions we made, about the way we showed up. I think I convinced myself that being family gave us a kind of permanent backstage pass, that we could come and go in your life as needed, and you'd always make room. But we didn't just knock, we barged in, and when you didn't open the door with a smile, we got loud instead of humble. I can't speak for Brian anymore, not in any meaningful way, but I can say that I'm sorry, and I hope someday we deserve a second knock. Thank you for everything you gave Emily, and Camille, and us. Even if we didn't understand the cost at the time. Warmly, Jessica, I read it twice. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't absolution. But it was real. And that meant something. I placed the letter in the same drawer as Emily's notes and Camille's college ring. It didn't erase anything, but it didn't need to. Some stories don't need rewriting. They just need a final sentence. That night I slept with the windows cracked open. No locks double-checked. No sense of waiting for the next invasion. Just the air, the quiet, and the slow, steady understanding that peace isn't a gift. It's a boundary. Maintained, earned, and kept. The week before Thanksgiving, I got an invitation I didn't expect. A simple cream-colored card, mailed, not emailed, with a short note on the back in tidy script. We're hosting a small gathering. Friends, neighbors, no drama. Would love to have you. No obligation, just a seat with your name on it. Cam, the younger one. Attached was a post-it with a smiley face and the words, "Yes, there will be real mashed potatoes, and pie, plural." I sat with it for a while, sipping my coffee. There was a time, not long ago, when that kind of gesture would have stirred up hesitation in me, a sense of guilt, or pressure, or maybe just exhaustion from the years of orchestrated holidays, full of false cheer and thin patience. But this was different. There were no expectations, no stagecraft, just a warm, open door. I called her that evening. "Hey," she answered, cheerful and a little breathless. "I was just cutting up butternut squash. It's fighting back." I got the invite. I wasn't sure you'd want to come. But I hoped. I could hear voices in the background, music playing, someone laughing. It sounded like real life, not the curated performance Brian had always demanded in group settings. "I'd like to," I said. "Thank you." Camille didn't make a big deal of it, just said, "Great. Bring nothing but yourself, and an appetite. I've got opinions about gravy." We hung up a few minutes later, but I sat on the couch long after, listening to the fire crackle. That call might not seem like much, but to me it felt like a tiny repair, one brick laid into the foundation of something sturdier, not family as obligation, but family as choice. I drove to Los Angeles the morning of Thanksgiving, taking the slow route down the coast. I stopped twice, once for coffee in San Luis Obispo, once at a scenic overlook I'd never noticed before. I didn't rush. Didn't fidget with the radio. Just let the road unspool in front of me. When I pulled into her neighborhood, quiet, tree-lined little craftsman houses pressed shoulder to shoulder, it was already dusk. The air smelled like rosemary and garlic and whatever else was bubbling in her kitchen. Camille met me at the door with flour on her cheek and a wooden spoon in one hand. "Good," she said. "You're just in time to judge the stuffing war." She led me into a house full of warmth, literal and emotional. There were maybe 10 people total. A couple of her friends from work, a neighbor from down the street, a woman she called her pandemic aunt, someone who used to leave soup on the porch during lockdown and never quite left her life. We ate at a long table with mismatched chairs and cloth napkins that had clearly been ironed. It wasn't fancy, but it was intentional. That's what stood out most. Everything in that room had been chosen. No one was there out of guilt or duty. No one sat stiffly with their phone just out of reach. People leaned in when others spoke. They listened. When it was my turn to share something I was thankful for, I kept it simple. "I'm grateful," I said, "for boundaries that held, and for new doors that opened, because they did." Camille reached over and squeezed my hand. There were no speeches, no group photo, just music playing softly from a speaker in the corner and the sound of people scraping pie crust from their plates. That night, I stayed in her guest room. It was small, but clean. A single framed photo of her with Camille, my daughter Camille, sat on the dresser. I hadn't known she still had it. It was from a birthday in the park, back when they were both 10, matching hats, missing teeth, sunshine. I stood there a long time looking at it. Grief is a long echo. You think you've mapped its contours, then you find a new corner you hadn't noticed before. I lay down in the twin bed, covers pulled tight, and thought about the word legacy. Brian had used it often, used it like a currency, like something owed. But here, in this quiet guest room, surrounded by nothing I'd purchased, gifted, or engineered, I finally understood what legacy really meant. It wasn't a name on a deed. It wasn't a trust fund or a family crest. It was this: a photo kept for over a decade, a door opened without fanfare, a chair saved at a table for someone who'd once been written off. I fell asleep with the soft sounds of the house around me, dishwasher humming, a cabinet clicking shut, faint laughter from the other room. It didn't feel like visiting. It felt like arriving. I drove home the next morning with leftovers in the passenger seat and something softer behind my ribs. Camille had packed everything with care: foil-wrapped slices of turkey, 2 kinds of pie in labeled containers, even a hand-drawn note tucked between the dinner rolls. For emergencies or nostalgia, whichever hits first. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. The coast was empty in stretches, the fog lifting slowly off the sea like it had somewhere else to be. I thought about Emily, as I often did after any holiday. Not with sharp grief, but with the quiet ache of knowing she would have loved it. Camille's party, the table, the mismatched silverware. The easy way everyone had belonged, without branding themselves as such. It's strange how the shape of family changes after a death. Or maybe not strange, inevitable. It either stretches to include those willing to be present in the pain, or it contracts to preserve the illusion that nothing's changed. Brian had chosen contraction, and I, finally, had chosen expansion. Not of obligation, but of possibility. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me like it always did. Still, solid, mine. I carried the leftovers inside and unpacked them like sacred things, labeled the containers, stored the pies. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my notebook again. November 29th. Something shifted this week. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was release, of expectation, of resentment. I didn't plan it. I just felt it. I didn't think I'd ever sit across a holiday table again without wondering what people wanted from me. But I did, and no one wanted anything except the salt. Later that evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in over a decade. I started decorating for Christmas. Nothing elaborate, no inflatable Santas or synchronized lights. Just the small box from the hall closet, a few strands of white bulbs, a garland I bought in Zo 3, and the carved wooden nativity Emily and I picked up at a market in Santa Fe our first year married. The figurines were worn smooth from years of handling. Camille used to rearrange them as a child, sneaking the donkey into the manger or turning the angel backwards just to make us laugh. I placed each piece with care. Joseph, Mary, the baby, then the animals, then, last of all, the little angel, now missing part of one wing. I set her beside the manger and stepped back, hands on my hips. It looked imperfect, and that made it feel true. Afterward, I made tea and sat by the window watching the lights blink slowly on the patio rail. It was quiet, but not empty. That distinction mattered now. The next day, I received an email from my financial planner, Shanna. Subject: Update, year-end giving, plus trust adjustments. She had attached a proposal, nothing major. Just a modest restructuring to make sure the house, in the event of my passing, would be handled cleanly, sold or retained according to my final draft. But what caught my eye was the line she'd added at the end. P.S. If you're still considering charitable giving, I'd recommend looking into silent support structures. Anonymous but intentional. No plaques. No press. Just purpose. I smiled at that. I'd told her months ago that I didn't want my name on a bench or a wing of a building. I just wanted to help, quietly, if I could. And now, finally, I had the clarity and the space to do so without it being leverage for someone else. That night, I drafted a note to a local hospice foundation, the one that helped Emily at the end. To whom it may concern, I would like to make a year-end contribution in memory of my daughter, Emily Clark. Please accept it with no recognition required. Just continue doing what you do for families like ours. With gratitude, Richard Clark. I enclosed a check, nothing enormous, but enough to help someone else's grief feel less unbearable. I sealed the envelope, walked it down to the mailbox at the end of the lane. It was dark by then, cold. The kind of cold that tightens your fingers and makes your breath visible. But it didn't feel harsh. It felt like something had settled in the air around me. That the season wasn't here to cover up what had happened this year, but to mark it, like a boundary stone. Here was before, and here was after. When I got back inside, I poured myself a small drink and turned on the old record player. Vinyl hissed to life, Ella Fitzgerald, soft and winking. I sat on the couch with the lights dimmed, the glow of the tree in the corner catching the edge of a glass ornament, a blue one, Camille's favorite, and I let the silence be what it was. Not absence, but a room with nothing left to prove. December arrived with clear skies and a kind of quiet I hadn't earned in years. No new disputes, no veiled threats, no mail with invisible strings. Just soft mornings, coffee, the sea. I began to understand something I hadn't fully grasped during the chaos. That reclaiming your peace doesn't come with fireworks. There's no applause, no award. It just stays, as long as you protect it. Like a fragile animal, it settles only when you stop chasing it and start guarding its space. The house stayed calm, the air crisp. Even the neighborhood felt steadier, as if it had been holding its breath through the summer and was only now exhaling. And me? I kept writing, not every day, but often enough that the notebook began to feel less like a record of defense and more like a map of where I was heading. Sometimes I'd jot down memories, early road trips with Emily, or the way Camille used to hum while brushing her teeth. Sometimes just small fragments of thought. Some people are only loud because they think silence is judgment, or there's dignity in choosing to be alone rather than misused. And one night, this. He'll keep telling his story. That's fine. I've stopped writing rebuttals. I'd flipped the dynamic. What once consumed my hours, cleaning up behind others, preparing for the next intrusion, had been replaced with something unfamiliar, but deeply welcome. Maintenance, of self, of space, of choice. That month, I made some decisions. I gave away 4 more boxes of things I no longer needed. Old gifts from people I no longer spoke to. Decorative clutter purchased in moments of retail therapy that never quite healed anything. I pared down my life not to punish the past, but to make room for the future, even if it was just quieter days and clearer drawers. I started taking daily walks. Not far, just up the hill and back, past the hedge that always grows uneven, past the neighbor with the garden gnome that wears a scarf in winter. Every now and then, I'd wave at someone. They'd wave back. One Saturday, a woman about my age, walking a golden retriever, paused to ask if I lived in the house on the corner. "I've admired the rosemary hedge," she said. "Always smells like something's cooking." I laughed. Sometimes there is. Sometimes it's just the wind faking me out. We talked a while. Her name was Janine. Divorced. 2 kids grown. Moved here from Santa Cruz after retiring from teaching. She had kind eyes and a voice that didn't rush. As she walked away, she called over her shoulder, "If you ever need someone to taste test the rosemary, I'm 3 houses down." It wasn't a flirtation. It was a kindness, the kind that leaves no debt. That evening, I mentioned it to Camille on the phone. She grinned through the receiver. "You've still got it." "I've got rosemary," I said, not sure about the rest. "You'd be surprised what starts with herbs and ends with pie." I could hear the lightness in her voice, the comfort. She wasn't checking in on me out of duty anymore. We were just talking. That was the real shift. Our conversations had changed shape, less about damage control, more about shared space, mutual ground. She'd send me links to oddball articles. "Dad, this guy built a house out of reclaimed pallets. You'd have opinions." I'd send her photos of sunrises, or the neighbor's ridiculous inflatable moose, dressed as Santa. One night, after a long pause in the conversation, she said, "I used to think you were so unshakable, like emotionally concrete." I was. But now, I don't know, you seem softer, but not weaker. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "Concrete cracks eventually, especially when no one patches it." She exhaled. "That's exactly it." In the days leading up to Christmas, I got a card from Jessica. No message, just a photo of her kids, smiling, wearing matching sweaters, and a signature, not even a return address. I placed it with the others, not on the mantle, not in the trash, just in the drawer, with the letter she sent, a quiet archive. Not forgiveness, but no longer anger either. It was like watching a storm move out to sea. No apology from the clouds, but no more rain. That Christmas, I didn't host. I didn't travel. I didn't perform. I spent it quietly, made a roast, watched a movie, read half a book. Camille FaceTimed me from her kitchen, holding up a slice of pie. Same recipe as last year. Still the best thing I make. "It's in your blood," I said. "Your mom used to say baking was 90% patience, 10% sugar. She also used to say your chili could strip paint. She wasn't wrong." We laughed. Later that night, after the call ended, I stood out on the deck. The wind was sharp, the moon clean. Everything in me had settled into a stillness I once thought impossible. Not because I got what I wanted, but because I'd finally stopped giving what I couldn't afford. The house behind me glowed gently. The ocean whispered. And for the first time since Emily's last Christmas, I didn't brace for what might go wrong. I just let it be. New Year's Eve arrived without ceremony. No parties, no champagne, no countdowns. Just me, a bowl of stew on the stove, and the fire doing its quiet work in the hearth. Around 9, I stepped outside. The sky was crystal clear, unusual for the coast in winter. Stars scattered like salt over black velvet. Somewhere down the road, a neighbor set off a single crackling firework. It didn't soar, just popped above the trees and vanished. I didn't miss the noise. I didn't miss the old habit of ringing in the new year by pretending I was glad to leave the last one behind. Because this time I wasn't. This was the year I got free. Not by accident, not by running, but by saying no, loud enough that it echoed. Back inside, I pulled down the old cedar box where I keep the letters, Emily's notes, Camille's postcards. A few things I'd written to myself during the worst of it, sealed in envelopes like time capsules. I added one more. This one marked, Open December 31st, 2026. Inside I wrote, You made it through the year you thought would break you. You learned how to stand up without stomping. You chose dignity over peacekeeping, and you stopped apologizing for wanting your own life back. Whatever comes next, remember this. The cost of being small is always higher than the cost of walking away. I sealed it, placed it under the others, then I went to bed. In January, Camille came to visit again, just for a weekend. She brought a puzzle this time, 1,000 pieces, ocean scene, ridiculous. This thing is going to make us hate each other, she said, spreading the pieces out on the dining table. Better the puzzle than politics, she laughed. Fair. We spent hours over that thing. Talking, not talking. Passing tea and pretzels and a playlist that shifted from jazz to folk to absolute nonsense. And while we worked, something settled between us. A rhythm. Unforced. Unclaimed. At one point she said, You know, I used to think strength meant never changing your mind. But now I think it means knowing when to. I looked up from a piece I'd been rotating for 10 minutes too long. That sounds suspiciously like something your mom would have said. She grinned. She said it first. I just finally heard it. That night, after we finished the border and declared temporary victory, she paused in the hallway before heading to the guest room. You okay if I say something real? Always. She hesitated. I think I used to be afraid of becoming like you, like emotionally. I nodded. You wouldn't be the first. But I'm not anymore. Because you're not the man I thought you were back then. Who did you think I was? A good man, just tired, and too nice for your own survival. She came and hugged me before I could reply. I like the new version better, she whispered. Then she disappeared into the guest room, leaving me with the edges of an ocean puzzle and a heart that felt like it had just been exhaled. The following month, in early February, I got an email from a woman named Celeste at the Hospice Foundation. She wanted to thank me, not just for the donation, but for the letter I'd written. It meant something, she wrote, more than the money, more than the name. It reminded us that what we do matters long after we're out of the picture. That stuck with me. Because so much of this year had been about untangling what mattered in the picture. The house, the names on the paperwork, the posts, the profiles, the petty legal maneuvers. None of that had lasted. But the kindness I'd shown Emily in her last days, the respect I offered Camille when she finally reached for her own truth, the silence I gave Brian instead of more rope to hang himself, that lasted. That mattered. In late March, I started a new habit. Letters to strangers. Every Sunday, I'd write one card and send it to someone whose work I admired. A librarian, a nurse, a crossing guard I passed on my walk, a woman who ran a tiny bookstore that always smelled like cinnamon and paper. Nothing dramatic. Just, thank you for showing up. The world's better with you in it. I didn't sign them with my full name. Just R. I wasn't trying to erase myself. Just reposition. Not as the man at the center of a family drama, but as a person living a real, steady life on the coast. A man who finally understood that legacy isn't about who remembers your name, but who remembers how they felt around you. And if I could leave behind a feeling, not grandeur, not perfection, just steadiness, then maybe the mess had all been worth it. That spring, the rosemary bloomed outside my window. Tiny blue flowers, resilient, low to the ground. Nothing flashy, but still growing, still here, still mine. By April, the town had come back to life. Tourists started trickling in, first the quiet ones with notebooks and trail shoes, then the louder ones with selfie sticks and sandals they'd regret. The local cafe brought the patio furniture back out. Windows stayed open a little longer each evening, and with all that bustle came the shift in rhythm that used to make me anxious. Before, every time the seasons changed, I braced for something: a surprise email, a knock at the door, another version of Brian's voice in a new disguise, asking, expecting, insisting. But this year, nothing came, and in that absence, something grew. I spent my mornings walking the shoreline path, passing the same two joggers and the older man who fed birds out of his palm like he'd made peace with their chaos. The woman with the golden retriever, Janine, started joining me on Thursdays. Just half-hour walks, mostly quiet, sometimes talk. One morning she said, "You seem lighter lately. Not relaxed exactly, but unburdened." "I'm still figuring out the difference between alone and free," I said. She nodded. Maybe they're not opposites. We didn't talk much more that day, but her words stayed with me, because I realized for years I'd treated solitude like a punishment, a verdict, proof that I'd failed to hold everyone close. But now it felt like proof that I'd finally stopped holding people who didn't hold me back. In May, Camille sent me an envelope. Inside was a photo. It was of her and my daughter, taken sometime in high school. They were at the edge of a river, grinning like they'd just won something. In a way they had. Time. Real friendship. An anchor before everything fractured. There was a note on the back. "I found this cleaning out my closet. Thought you'd want to keep it. P.S. Started therapy again. It's helping. You help too. Love, C." I placed it in the cedar box. I hadn't cried in months, but I did then. Not from sadness. From the realization that things heal sideways, not straight. That trust comes back through small gestures, not big reunions. A few days later, I drove up to San Francisco for the first time in years. I parked near the marina, walked the water's edge, bought a sandwich at a deli where Emily and I once argued over mustard. I laughed out loud, remembering it, how she'd insisted on ordering for both of us and got mine wrong, then blamed the menu. The cashier had rolled his eyes. Emily gave him a tip big enough to make up for it. She always knew how to exit a scene with grace. On my way back to the car, I passed a bookstore tucked between a plant shop and a place that only sold handmade beeswax candles. Inside, a table display read, "Stories We Needed This Year." I picked up a thin memoir, written by someone I'd never heard of. The title was quiet, the cover plain. I skimmed a few pages and saw a line that stopped me. I thought healing would feel like fireworks, but it felt like getting my keys back after a long day. I bought it, drove home with the windows cracked, read it that night cover to cover, then added my own line to the notebook. You can spend your whole life trying to prove you're a good man, or you can finally become one in the absence of applause. June came, then July. Camille visited again for Father's Day, not with gifts, but with groceries and a playlist. She made me dinner, sat out on the deck with her feet up and a bowl of strawberries in her lap. "This," she said, "is better than any restaurant. No lines, no bill, no forced conversation. No family drama." We clinked glasses, and I realized we'd built something. Not a repaired version of what had been broken, but something new, not based on shared grief or obligation or guilt, but on the simple, radical act of showing up clean, of starting again without dragging the wreckage into the room. When she left that Sunday afternoon, she hugged me the way Emily used to. One hand firm on my back, a pause long enough to say what words couldn't. I didn't follow her to the door. I didn't watch from the window. I just let the house return to stillness. And I sat in that stillness, no longer afraid of it, because I had learned something I never thought I would. You don't need a crowd to be whole. You don't need the people who misunderstood you to understand you now. You just need truth, a steady table, a notebook with no lies in it, and a life you didn't borrow from anyone else. It was early August when I saw Brian again, not in person, on a screen. Camille sent me a message. Did you see this? Just a link, no context. I clicked, expecting an article, maybe a meme. Instead, it was a video, a podcast of sorts. Brian, sitting in a carefully curated space, exposed brick, potted plants, a soft focus background that made him look more enlightened than flawed. The episode title was vague but telling. Family, forgiveness, and the price of boundaries. I nearly closed the tab, but something in me stayed still. He talked for 40 minutes. Most of it was dressed-up language, the kind of emotional jargon that sounds wise until you listen closely. He spoke about being misunderstood, about intergenerational tension, and narrative control. He never named me, not once, but he told a story. One where a father retreated from love, one where old wounds hardened into cold logic, one where a man chose punishment over restoration. It was all there. Without saying it, he said everything. I watched it once, then again, and I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing, which I realized was everything. There was a time when I would have drafted a rebuttal, written a quiet essay, highlighted the legal settlement, pointed to the facts, the paper trail, the truths etched in official documents and exhausted hearts. But this time I didn't need to. He could have his version. He could curate it, sell it, dress it in linen and film it under golden hour lighting. It didn't matter, because truth doesn't require retweets. It requires consistency. And my life, quiet, steady, whole, was louder than anything he could stage. I replied to Camille, "I saw, and I'm okay, thank you." She wrote back one word, "Good." Then, "Come visit in September. Bring pie." The rest of August passed gently. I finished the puzzle. Turns out the last piece had fallen under the rug. Classic metaphor. Janine and I started having coffee on Saturday mornings. Nothing labeled, nothing rushed. Two people sharing space. She brought cinnamon muffins. I made coffee strong enough to warm the soul. Sometimes we sat without speaking for 10 minutes at a time. And that silence was never awkward. Just shared. One morning, she asked me what I'd do if the house burned down. Rebuild? Not the structure, she said. The life. Would you stay here? I thought about it, then nodded. Yes. Not because I can't leave, but because this is the first place I've lived that didn't belong to anyone else's vision. She smiled. That's the difference between ownership and freedom. I wrote that down later. Some houses trap you in legacy. Others set you free in memory. This one had become the latter. In late August, I started organizing the notebooks. All of them. I stacked them chronologically, labeled the spines, and boxed them neatly. I didn't do it with some lofty intent of publishing or preserving. I did it because I'd told the truth. And I wanted that truth to have a place, even if no one else ever opened those pages. I made a new folder on my computer too, Living Documents. Inside, my revised will, the plain language version, the hospice donation log, a few letters I never sent, but might one day. And one final note, left for Camille to find if anything ever happened. I didn't fix it all. That was never the goal. But I stopped lying to myself about who I was and who I wasn't. That's the best inheritance I could leave. September came like a hand on the shoulder, familiar, steady, cool. Camille welcomed me at her door with her usual casual warmth, hair up, socks mismatched. The apartment was small, full of light. A worn rug, too many books, plants and windows that looked like they were thriving despite neglect. We made dinner together, mushroom risotto, because she insisted I learn, and a salad that mostly served as a delivery mechanism for croutons. Afterward, we sat on the fire escape with wine and coffee mugs. She said, "Sometimes I wonder if healing is just remembering who you were before you were taught to perform." I looked at her. "You think I've remembered?" She leaned her head against the railing. "I think you finally stopped auditioning for people who never deserved the show." I didn't reply, didn't need to. The night held us both in something calm. A few streets over, someone was playing jazz from a third-floor window. Somewhere below, a dog barked and was instantly hushed. I closed my eyes and thought, so this is what it feels like to arrive. Not with triumph, not with a banner, but with breath. Clean breath. No panic behind it. No fear of the next ask, the next spin, the next rewrite. Just breath. Just the end of needing to explain who you are. Fall past like a slow exhale. No more reckonings. No letters. No stings. No unexpected phone calls twisting the gut. Just a stretch of good days. Some ordinary, some quiet enough to feel like reward. By October, the wind came in stronger off the coast. The rosemary bloomed a second time, stubborn as ever. I wrapped the porch furniture in canvas and pulled the blankets out of the cedar chest. The kind of preparations that mean nothing to someone just passing through, but everything to someone who's finally staying put. One night, I dreamed of Emily. We were sitting at the kitchen table in Sacramento, the old one with the wobbly leg. She was younger, not sick yet, and she had her chin in her hand, watching me try to fix the toaster. "You always think you can fix things," she said. "Including this toaster," I replied. "It's not broken," she said. "It just wants to be retired." I looked up and she smiled. "Some things don't need repairing," she said. "They just need release." I woke up before I could answer, but I got the message. That morning, I finally cleared out the last closet in the hallway, the one I hadn't touched since moving in. It held Emily's old journals, a few boxes of Camille's childhood art, some coats no one would ever wear again. I kept what mattered. I let go of the rest, not with fanfare, just with reverence. One Friday afternoon in November, I stood in the kitchen folding dish towels when the doorbell rang. It was Janine, holding a brown paper bag and looking sheepish. "I made too much soup," she said, "and I thought maybe you'd pretend it was yours for a night. Only if I get credit for the seasoning." We ate together, sitting on the deck with bowls in our laps and scarves at our necks. The fog rolled in over the water, thick and silver. She didn't stay long, just an hour or so. But before she left, she stood in the doorway and said, "You know, I think you're one of the only people I've ever met who actually earned their peace." I didn't know how to answer that. Still don't. But I think she meant it as grace, not praise. I didn't feel proud. I just felt present. That was enough. On the day that would have been Emily's 65th birthday, I walked the bluff trail alone. I brought nothing but a thermos of tea and one of her scarves, the blue one with the faint herringbone weave. The wind was sharp, and the gulls were loud, and the horizon stretched out like an answer you're finally ready to receive. I sat on a bench and drank the tea, said nothing out loud. Just let the memory of her sit beside me without demanding anything. She would have liked the stillness. She would have liked what I'd finally built. And she would have known, before I ever admitted it, that the real work wasn't drawing the line with Brian. It was accepting that I didn't need to keep everyone just because I'd once called them family. That's the hardest thing. To grieve someone who isn't dead, but who's chosen a version of you that you can no longer live with. To love someone enough to let the door close softly behind them, and not rush to reopen it just because they came knocking with newer words. I never replied to Brian's podcast, never corrected the narrative. I let him keep it. Because the truth has its own gravity. It doesn't need traction, it just needs time. And time, as it turns out, is kinder than people promise. Not because it forgets, but because it lets you choose what to carry forward. In December, I finalized the documents with Shauna, the house, the savings, the rights to everything I'd written. It would all go where it was meant to. No loopholes, no confusion. Camille knew the plan. So did Janine, in case Camille ever needed help sorting through it all. "I hope it's decades before any of this matters," Janine said when I told her. "Me too," I said. but I sleep better knowing it's there. And now, it's quiet. This morning, I walked the path along the bluff and saw a father teaching his daughter how to skip stones. She was maybe 8, with a wild ponytail and untied sneakers. She kept throwing the rocks too high, laughing each time they plopped straight into the sea. The father didn't correct her. He just kept handing her new stones, watching. That's what it's supposed to be, I think. Family. Not control, not performance. Just handing each other what we need, again and again, while we figure it out for ourselves. When I got home, I opened the notebook one last time. There was only one page left. I picked up the pen, sat with it, and wrote, "I am not bitter. I am not waiting. I am not owed. I am free. And that is enough." Then I closed the book, set it on the shelf, and went out to make a cup of tea. The tide was out, the sky was clean, and the day stretched ahead of me with nothing in it that I didn't choose. That's not a resolution. It's a life. And it's mine. Thank you for taking this journey all the way to the end. If you ever want to revisit, revise, or build a new story around themes like this, I'll be here. Take care and go gently.